What we see in the market is that there's probably $150 billion worth of assets orbiting the Earth today. This is maybe tripling in the next 10 years. And like any other assets on ground that have value, they need to be serviced. There are many aspects of the space industry that will become obsolete, or at least they will change. And that originated from a very simple idea that space was not serviceable. We define our job as designing, building, and operating assets that we put in space. We call them servicers, and we put them in space to service other satellites who are already in space.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Hey, space enthusiasts. My guest today is Adel Haddoud. He's the CEO and founder of Infinite Orbits. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Rafael.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. So the way we usually start is with the entrepreneur giving us the elevator pitch, please.
Okay, so Infinite Orbit, we aim at being one of the leaders of in-orbit servicing in the world. We define our job as designing, building, owning, and operating assets that we put in space. We call them servicers, and we put them in space to service other satellites who are already in space. What we see in the market is that there's probably $150 billion worth of assets orbiting the Earth today. This is maybe tripling in the next 10 years. And like any other assets on ground that have value, they need to be serviced. And servicing is becoming available. We see it in around two lines of servicing. One line, which is safeguarding what you have in space. And we have a servicer for that called OrbitGuard. A bit of that is SSA, inspection. A bit of it is also of military use. And another line of business, which is around extending the value you have from your assets, getting more money on a longer period from the same asset that is in space. And the segments there are life extension, how you can make a satellite stay in orbit longer than what its original fuel allow it to do, refueling when it becomes possible at some point, repairs or augmentations, things like that when they become available. So we operate outside of France and we serve customers all around the world.
Okay, thanks for that intro. And then, so your name, Infinite Orbit, how did you come up with that? Is that maybe you were talking about life extension, so the assets can stay in orbit indefinitely, or what was the thinking?
It was a very nice moment with my co-founders that I remember very well. Where we have multiple ideas. And I think the very basic idea at the end was to make the existence of any assets in orbit for an infinity. Maybe a little bit of it is sustainability. Having an asset that reaches an end of life too soon, that you have to deorbit or becomes a junk, we never kind of accepted that. So we want to make the life in orbit goes for infinity. This is what I remember. I'm not sure I remember everything about that moment, but this is what I remember.
And from what you remember when you guys co-founded the company, what was the motivation? Like, were you guys already in the space sector and you saw how things are happening currently and you didn't agree with it, like you said, from a sustainability point of view, or what was the origin story there?
So the origin story started out of Columbia University in New York. So I was actually the first investor in the company. I'm an aerospace engineer from last century, so I'm last millennia actually, so much older than my other co-founders. Enthusiast by space, wanted to become an astronaut, and the usual story, but stayed connected a little bit to space without doing much in it. And then personal connection, they started the Columbia Space Club. We're enthusiastic about a lot of technologies, and one basic idea of a technology that actually sparked there is how to use the technology that allow cars to be run honestly with a simple camera, like a self-driving cars you have now, how to use the same technology, AI powered, put it in space and allow for autonomous vision-based rendezvous. And autonomous vision-based rendezvous is what makes in-orbit servicing cost-effective. And they convinced me, actually. I wrote the first check and the rest was history.
Okay, since you've spoken about it, the optical technology there, let's maybe, even though I wanted to talk about technology a little bit later, let's maybe open up that topic now on a high level, right? We're a non-technical podcast, right? So you were talking, if I understood correctly, about using just basically cameras here, right? I think as an automotive, as far as I know about it, there's this like, there has been this discussion going on. Is the cameras enough, or do you also need like other technology like LiDAR and things like that? Do you just want to give our listeners like a few minutes, a quick breakdown, how you guys think about it, what the options are? Yeah, how this all works.
The basic assumption, as I said, is that a camera, which is a passive sensor, 700 grams, few watts, form factor smaller than my hand, should give you enough information to navigate. That's the very basic assumption. And I think if you really mimic your body, which is an eye and a brain, you're able to navigate. And we've seen that happening on ground. So the basic assumption was we will do it in orbit. The other basic assumption is also that it is a condition for the rendezvous to scale. If for every rendezvous you need to mimic what we're doing with the International Space Station, with people on the ground, with all kind of sensors, you'll be doing rendezvous with much bigger assets. Big means expensive in space. You know, more sensors means more battery, means more bigger solar panels, bigger structures, more expensive launch, and things like that. I think I'm happy to report that we proved that on the ground, that it's doable. I mean, still space is hard, so we still have to prove more in orbit. We've sent cameras and rendezvous to orbit in different missions, but we have not completed the full rendezvous that is vision-based. This planned for 2026. But what we've seen on ground is this is doable with multiple cameras, with algorithms, GNC algorithms for rendezvous running inside the camera with the right use of computing power that you have there, with the right integration with the OCS system of the servicer. We've proved on ground that this is doable. So we really look forward to a full demonstration in geo orbit in 2026.
And so just to confirm, you're just using cameras, you're not using anything like an active sensor like a LiDAR. And the advantage, I guess, is that it's less complex, it's cheaper, and all
correct.
Of this, lighter.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Correct. Yeah. The only extra sensor that we'll be using is a laser rangefinder to confirm depth when we're doing terminal rendezvous, but we're not using any other sensor yet. Correct.
And would you say that this technology you're describing there, and it's, you know, I guess what for our listeners, what in the sector we talk about rendezvous, proximity operations, and docking RPOD, is that RPOD technology, is that what you'd consider the core of Infinite Orbits, the core of the company?
Oh, yes. Yes. That's the core. That's what 80% of our engineers, they do. We're a fabless company. We go manufacture our assets in, you know, our clean rooms, and we're in Toulouse, essentially is the capital of space for France. Maybe you can claim for Europe as well. So we have enough know-how and enough supply chain around us to do all the rest. So we focus on our core technology, which is the RPOD with the docking. So we master that 100%. The rest, we ask ourselves questions of make or buy all the time. You know, how much we get interaction with our suppliers. You know, definitely don't want to have a plant. You know, we don't want to have this responsibility. There's enough around us. We're not going to build propulsion. There is enough around us, radios and all these things. We buy them. We need to be good at buying, you know, making the right choice of technology. To what level we interact with our supplier is a very fundamental question. We need to drive the supply chain around us to deliver what we need at the right time, the right quality, the right price. So we are a good team there, but the core technology is the rendezvous. We manufacture the cameras and the software that runs in our cameras.
How about sort of a question that myself and I think many people are perennially interested in at the moment. So, you know, as we're starting to talk about more AI and autonomy, well, everywhere, to be honest, but also in space. So, you know, I'd say we obviously have very good computing equipment and constantly improving on Earth. How does that, what's your view of the computing, the hardware side, the computing hardware in space?
Well, what I see is that we need to trust the future, because the pace of change in computing power on ground or embarked is changing a lot. We're already running AI algorithm embarked, and we already running them on ground. So we train our software, our navigation software on the ground, and there is enough computing power to train on data sets of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of images. So that's we're doing that a lot already, and we are able to port that on our camera, so it runs inside the camera. So we have a bit of embarked AI that will be flying for the first time later this year. We are in discussions with providers of computing power. We tested many chips, GPUs, CPUs, and we'll be continuing doing that because I really see AI and autonomy as a condition for doing cost-effective maneuvers in space. Otherwise, we will not achieve it.
That was actually my next question about the level of autonomy. So is your system designed to be fully autonomous, or is there, like, as they say, a human in the loop anywhere?
It's a very tricky question. Okay, I'll try to answer it at a high level without being very technical. But the way we're approaching it is that the level of autonomy you want actually gets higher when you get closer to your asset. If you are doing far-range rendezvous, you don't need that much autonomy. You can use the ground, things like that. When you get closer, you are in between mid-range rendezvous, close-range rendezvous. You can use both, a bit of autonomy, but still ground in the loop that can, take some action at some point. When you're super close, you need to be fully autonomous. Where's that limit? What does super close, mid close, far? Right? It depends on the mission, depends on the orbit, depends on the calculation. I'm not very technical to answer the question, I guess.
And does that have to do with the latency of the signal versus the speed at which things are happening, so to say, the required detect?
Yeah, that's one of the aspects. Not just the latency, but how much you trust the fact that you can actually talk. If you're doing a rendezvous with an asset that is much bigger, and the asset is than you as a servicer, and the asset is hiding you from communicating efficiently on the ground, then you're not communicating in the last few meters of rendezvous and docking. So you need a certain level of autonomy that gets bigger and bigger when you are behind your asset, for example. So it's not just the latency, it's also you're too close to rely only or fully on communication from elsewhere. So you need to be autonomous.
Gotcha. Okay, let's take that and run with that notion of RPOD at the core of the company and circle back towards the market. And you have helpfully laid out during the elevator pitch that this is obviously a market which the in-space servicing market, or that has various, let's call them, verticals, right? And somewhere the RPOD technology is at the core of many, if not most of them. There's a number of other companies, of course. Astroscale was on this podcast a couple of months ago. There's companies like Starfish, ClearSpace, and so forth that will also say that RPOD is at the core of their company. And then there are all of these different verticals that you started describing, right? The refueling, life extension, I guess active debris removal, space situational awareness. If I'm missing any, then you can please complete. So if you kind of come back and look at this market and other players, how do you want Infinite Orbits to be positioned?
Okay. Yeah, thank you for the question. I think all the companies that you named, I'm happy that they are here. We're in competition. Sometimes we're in collaboration. Space is bigger than all of us. Space is hard. And I think those who are successful are those who actually knew how to collaborate. We were the first company to put a nanosatellite in GEO just because we knew how to collaborate with so many people. And I think this is fundamental. Now that you talked about competition, I always try to remind that we need to all collaborate. And if you're smart enough, you can collaborate and be successful because space is hard. Now, we all agree that the core technology that needs to be mastered is the rendezvous and the docking. And I think all of us are trying to master this technology. I do believe we didn't all take the same choice in terms of technology, and we didn't all take the same orbit, let's say. Some are doing LEO, some are doing GEO, and I'll explain that in a bit. And, some are doing different ways of docking or different ways of rendezvous that can scale or not scale. We can discuss a lot about that, but fundamentally, we're doing vision-based and only vision-based. And we really think that this is the core for autonomy. So this is for technology. I don't think, some differences, but not fundamental. Now, in terms of segments, what you call, I call them segments and probably not, but verticals. The way we look at it in timelines. Some segments are mature now from pure commercial point of view, and some are not. So I think two segments that are becoming mature enough, and by mature, I mean there are customers, there are contracts, there is price in the market, there is a standard of how you do things. It's definitely life extension is definitely one of them. This has happened in geo. It's happening again. There are few players, few contracts. We made few things public last year. So we're focusing on this because it is mature from our point of view. Another segment is mature, which I call SBSS, space-based surveillance system, inspection, getting close to an asset in geo or in LEO for that case, and knowing what's happening around this asset. I think it's also mature. Few missions were advertised lately. We're working on inspection mission in geo, 2026, maybe early 2027. So those are mature markets, in my opinion. As mature as a startup would want it to be. Some other segments are not from commercial point of view. I cannot comment from a technical point of view. Maybe people are ready to do things, but from a commercial point of view, I don't see a lot of active debris removal mission. It's still very hard. It has not been demonstrated. Difficult to say who will pay. Is there any private money to pay for that? So there's some demonstration missions here and there, which is really good because it's pushing the technology. But it's not clear how that will transform into a commercial market. I think the refueling is also another example. There are probably missions that I'm not aware of, maybe defense mission, but it's hard to see how an asset that was not made to be refuelable can be refueled. So we definitely see the business case of refueling an asset that actually needs fuel. That's actually very simple to see, but it needs to be made refuelable. And that, I think, is not there yet. Maybe there's one or two assets in space that are made to be refuelable, but I definitely see that happening maybe post 2030. Again, the core technology will allow to address all these segments, but some segments are mature commercially now, and some will be mature commercially more in 2030. And we try to adapt our strategy towards that, focus on the market that we see now, and be ready from a technology point of view to service the market that will come later.
And so are you focusing on you mentioned the two segments, to use your term, which you consider more developed, being life extension and then let's call it space sensing or space domain awareness. People call it different names. Yep. Are those the ones you're focusing on because they're more developed?
Yeah, correct. We did put assets in space with cameras and rendezvous capability, or we participated to missions. We have advertised 2 geo missions that we're doing to do an inspection end of 2026. We're getting very close to an asset less than a few hundred meters for an inspection mission. And we also advertised that we'll be doing a life extension mission in 2027. And that's rendezvous and docking. Yeah, that's what we're focusing on right now.
And so while you cited life extension as a more mature market, I mean, in the large scheme of things, comparing it to sort of any other industry, yes, there have been missions. I guess many of them were the Northrop Grumman life extension, mission. What's it called? Mission extension vehicle, something like that.
Yeah, MEV. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but they were just a handful, right? It's not like it's just a market with things are happening thousands of times. How do you see the path of market development here, and including commercial market? And is there anything that you think is holding back the market?
Yeah, thanks for the 2 questions. Do I see the market? How do I see it? And is anything holding the market? Let me answer the second very quickly, and then I come back to the first. Our servicer for do life extension is called Endurance. Rendezvous dock keeps an average geo asset in orbit for an extra 5 years. If I had 10 Endurance in orbit today, then be busy for the next 5 years. And I think you can just ask geosatellite operators. There are not many of them. Last time I counted, I found 56. So it's not a very difficult market to characterize. There are 400, 500 assets in geo. Average age is 15 years. They generate X amount of money a year, maybe less at the end of the year. And then the replacement is actually a few hundred, $300 million or maybe more. The last mission that also failed to a certain extent, via Sat-3, I think, was probably $600 million, something like that. So the business case for satellite operator is, should I invest $300 to $600 million on new capacity for the next 15 years and make a technological bet and a commercial bet in such fast-paced changing environment with the Starlink, Cooper, and all that, trying to disrupt this market? Like, should I do that? Or should I keep an asset in orbit for an extra 5 years? And in a fast changing environment like ours, fast changing market, then the question is very easy to answer for them. If I can get an extra 5 years from an asset that's already given me money, and don't make a 15 years technological bet with hundreds of millions of dollars, I should do that. Now, not people like ourselves or other actors in the market, competitors are not all ready to put 10 endurances in orbit. So we're coming slowly at a certain pace. Capital is one of availability of capital to do that, proving the technology, making the first mission, landing a super successful mission at the right cost also is very important. But I'm 100% sure that when more of us, and not just Northrop Grumman did it in, a first mission in a different scheme with a big, heavy satellite of 2 or 3 tons. Endurance is 700 kilos. So once we do Endurance 1, Endurance 2, 3, and 4, and 5 will be there soon after. The fundamentals of the market are very easy actually to calculate for this life extension geo.
And so I guess you were talking about the total investment cost of a new satellite. I guess the other way the satellite operators can look at it is basically, so they have an existing satellite, and you can give us the numbers you use, but any sort of geo satellite, if it's a decent satellite, will obviously make many millions of dollars in revenue a year, right? And then I guess you're saying that, I don't know what your pricing is, but you will charge obviously something less than that incremental revenue.
Yeah, correct. I think cost is a very important element of the question, definitely. So I will not share pricing in this call or anything, but we went through these numbers with satellite operators, and we know what we are offering is actually in line of how much money they're making. Of course, life extension will not apply, is not a good solution for any satellite, not all of them. Some of them can be let inclined. Some of them need a life extension in a form of slot transfer. They have value over a location. They cannot travel to that location, so you need to move them. And the business and the pricing of those different scenarios are different. But at the end, what you said is right. How much the satellite is making, how the customer is secured in the future of this cash flow, that will give him automatically how much money they can pay us to keep the asset in orbit. And when you run the numbers, you'll see that, in my opinion, with the price point that we're bringing to the market, and we believe it's very competitive, 1/3 of the satellite reaching end of life in the next 5 or 10 years are good candidates for life extension from pure financial point of view. And that 1/3 is actually maybe 100 satellites.
And sort of staying on that point of sort of making the unit economics work for a moment, without giving away anything that may be confidential, but are you able to maybe even combine revenue streams? Let's say you send up, because then you're talking about life extension, right? So just make sure this is clear to our listeners as well. I assume this is basically the same thing that Northrop Grumman is doing. Obviously,
yes,
size factor, I get that, but just basically you have your spacecraft, I guess it's called Endurance. It finds the satellite that, once it's life extended, it attaches itself to that satellite and becomes its basically new propulsion system, right? So the point here being, you have a spacecraft that you sent up. I mean, could you pack that spacecraft with sensors and then use that also for space sensing and make revenue on that at the same time? Or is that are there technological limits to that?
Maybe we should hire you, Rafael. Yeah, of course. I think I'll give you.
I should mention my hourly rate.
Yeah, and then I think the camera in orbit will be cheaper. I think, yeah, I think you're right. I mean, the moment you have an asset in space, especially in geo, today there may be 400 or 500 assets in geo. It's not an easy thing to do. The moment you have an asset in geo that can move, slot transfer, and station keep and co-locate, and all these difficult things, yeah, you want to get the best out of it. So docking and doing life extension, I call it giving the kiss of life, to your client. That's exactly what we do. We dock and we keep it in orbit before we both go to graveyard. But if you have an asset in orbit, there's a lot you can do. And definitely what you said is, putting cameras, it's a lot easier than docking. So you can do SSA with the same asset, and you can do so many other things. Yeah. And we at Infinite Orbit have a very pragmatic approach. If you work a few years, invest money and time, take risk, and put an asset in orbit, you do not want it to limit it to one use. So you want to use and get as much as possible from this asset. So you're right. Putting cameras, we would put the camera Edison mission, the Leo mission that went off like a couple of weeks ago. And yeah, we put one of our camera. We're using it as an SSA camera.
So along the same lines of maximizing the use out of it, right? So you're talking about extending your customers' lives, but how about extending your own lives, right? Because I mean, maybe you extend the life of a customer geosatellite for, let's say, 3 years, and then the customer is like, no, it's obsolete. Thank you very much, Infinite Orbits. But and then you kind of said, oh, then you would both go to graveyard orbit. But why? Is that a necessity? Let's say there was actually economic and reliable in-space refueling for your own spacecraft available. Would that not be an option as well?
You're giving me a second reason to hire you, Rafael. Maybe I should check your hourly rate. We're making endurance refuelable. So it is, I think we announced that as well. Okay, for us, it's a test for now. We're not sure how fuel will become available, what form of fuel, when, at what price in orbit. All that is still not clear. But an easy thing to do technologically is to make our own assets refuelable. If we believe in the servicing market, we should be the first one to accept and try to make ourselves serviceable, which we're doing. So it's a bet. We'll see if the market of refueling is there in a few years. And if we can refuel endurance, then we have more delta V. And then if we are able to go dock to other customers, then we can do more life extension to other customers. Taking your camera SSA aspect, which is very similar to our inspection mission. If endurance, take your example, stays 3 years and have the fuel to do 5 years, and then my customers say, I don't need you anymore, then yeah, definitely we can do something useful with this extra delta V we have and do inspection, for example.
So finishing up on the market, I mean, we've talked a lot about life extension, but I think that's fine since it is the sort of, an obvious near-term use case. But apart from the others that we already mentioned, like active debris removal and so forth, is there any other segments we have not mentioned that you think are worth mentioning?
I think I talked about getting close to assets, a non-collaborative way for a very small servicer. Our OrbitGuards are less than 100 kilo. Okay, it's an asset that is less than 100 kilo that can actually go to geo, live in geo, and move a lot and do rendezvous with non-collaborative assets or passivated assets. There's definitely a defense use case there. There are many talks in the last couple of months about the necessity of having bodyguards for satellites. And this is why, by the way, we call it OrbitGuard. That also was a nice evening with my co-founders, and we came with that name. So the OrbitGuard family is meant to rendezvous with many different assets, move a lot, very small, very light. So you can have a lot of those. And you can see them as bodyguards. You can see them as guardians of the geo belt or the assets who are in the geo belt. So that's also something that I see an acceleration now that OrbitGuard 1 was in orbit, OrbitGuard 2 is going this year, and OrbitGuard 3 coming in 2026. I think there are many other companies sending small geo assets. So we're a big believer in geo. We think it's a fundamental orbit. The fact that there are alternatives for telecommunication in LEO or in MEO It does not mean that geo is disappearing. It's changing, but it's still, if you look at asset value, and I really like to look at it like that, if you look at asset value in space, today, you have $100 billion worth of assets in geo, and maybe $10 billion worth of assets in LEO. So geo is still where the expensive, heavy stuff, important long-term assets are, and they need to be safeguarded and they need to be looked after.
So I mean, the bodyguard, oh my God, we're going to quickly cross over into classified territory, and this conversation is going to start. But I guess if you're bodyguard, that would at the extreme also imply defensive and maybe even offensive capabilities in case you're like dealing with an adversary spacecraft, which may use, I don't know, lasers, jamming, chemicals, whatnot.
Yeah, this is beyond my knowledge. So right now I'm calling it inspection. So the ability, and we're doing it in a very civil manner, public information as well, to a satellite that is passivated. That's the mission of 2023. But definitely, I'm reporting what I see in the news. The need of having assets that guard the satellite is definitely there.
So one question following on from that point, because I mean, sort of the dual use case, right? Of course, as always with pretty much anything in space, that's relatively much stronger. I would argue more developed in the US. And so the US-based companies, they can take advantage of, contracts on that side to then possibly cross-subsidize their non-military activities. How is it sort of being a European company in this segment, or actually not only European, like a non-US company in this segment, possibly having to compete with the US? Is that an issue? Is there something you wish that, would happen in European politics? Or I don't know, do you have a general view on this?
Yeah, politics usually not the best person to comment on that. What I see, what you said is correct. I mean, there's definitely a dual use aspect in space in general. So let's not hide it. We have contracts with the European Defense Fund. There are being calls to do, space-based surveillance systems that we won and we collaborated. So we're gradually understanding the need for defense in general broad terms. Not 100% clear for us if there is, I mean, definitely the market is much bigger in the US and much more advanced, and also competition is much bigger, much more advanced. We just opened an entity in the USA last summer because we have customers in the USA, we have technology partners in the USA. So we're trying to discover this market, both from civil and military point of view. Are we, as a French European company, ready to serve this market? I would say no. Are we well established in Europe to serve defense market in Europe? I would say yes. And, we're gradually learning this market, but it's new for us. Everything that we did so far is purely commercial.
Gotcha. And so let me circle back to the tech side, just to finish off a couple of questions there. One was, I realized I've been talking about sort of the sensor stack, if you will, of RPOD. But when you're talking about certain use cases of getting close to objects and then maybe even having to the docking part, and you mentioned it may also be non-cooperative objects. Is there any sort of robotics, like a grappler or anything involved in your vehicle as well?
Yes. So let's spend a few minutes on this non-collaborative. What does non-collaborative mean? Like many things in space, it's the name acronym. It has different meaning for different people. So non-collaborative means for us that the asset we're docking to was not meant to be docked to when it was created. Still, when we dock to an asset to do a life extension, the asset is expecting us to dock. We're not going to dock to someone who doesn't want us to be docked. I mean, this won't be feasible, and it's a problem. But the asset is actually non-collaborative, but prepared, prepared to be out of service, prepared to post-docking do certain operation, to adapt to our coming. So this is what we mean by non-collaborative. There is a certain level of collaboration that is still happening. The way we do it is the Rendezvous is business vision-based. So few cameras in our assets that are running the Rendezvous until the last meter. And then there is a docking mechanism, which is an arm and gripper There is a soft docking, and then there is a stronger docking after that. So you soft dock when everything is fine, you rigidify the docking, and you take over the navigation of the full stack. This is how we do it. We're actually demonstrating that in a lab as we speak. So the Rendezvous and the docking together. So maybe in a few weeks we'll have something out about those results. I'm very much looking forward to share that.
Gotcha.
Hmm.
And my last question on the tech side is if you look forward now into the future, is there anything that you're particularly excited about, maybe that doesn't exist yet or exists at a low TRL, but you think is going to be very exciting for the industry you're in?
Oh, it's very difficult to have this one as a last question. I could be talking for the next hour, Rafael. No,
Just pick one.
No, I think hours. Really make a rendezvous in geo with 3 or 4 cameras that are 700 gram each, and with an asset that is less than 100 kilogram. To me, it's super cool. We really look forward to do that. There are so many other technologies also that I see that different ways people are trying to come with how to do docking. I see technologies here and there. So also excited to see that. Maybe let me share one. One of the things that I'm really looking at right now is how to go to geo. Let's not forget that, 3 things difficult in space. I like always to say that. Go to space, come back from space, do rendezvous in space. This is how I see it. We're doing one of the 3, which is rendezvous, but going to space and going to geo is, still not an easy thing. There's only 1 or 2 suppliers. There are many suppliers coming. The OTV market is coming. How to quickly go to geo. Those are things we're looking at, because it will just make our market more accessible and make our life easier, so we can focus in what we do best. If with a phone call and we pay a check and we are in geo a few months later, I'm looking forward to this moment. It's probably not going to happen this year, but maybe in a few years.
You're actually right. Many people keep forgetting that, and I don't know how many of our listeners are aware, but going to LEO is actually relatively easy these days. Going to GEO is much more limited because the Falcon 9 doesn't take you directly there, right? So actually, how do you guys go to GEO?
There are 3 different ways, to go to GEO. Either a rocket takes you there, or another satellite takes you there. Are you in the back of a satellite on the back of OTV that was made for that? Some kind of a kick stage or something like that, or it's a rocket direct to geo. With our OrbitGuard one, we went on a direct to geo. Doesn't happen very often. Not sure how much we can count on it, but it did happen every now and then. So that can happen.
Like a Ariane 6.
Ariane 6. Ariane 6 we could do. There's a version of it that will do it. We did it with a Falcon Heavy a couple of years ago. There may be other launchers that I'm not aware of that would be able to do it. More than 100 new launchers being created in the last year. So I look forward to see who's successful, who's not, how they're different from each other, if someone can specialize in some of the needs I have. The OTV business is also getting structured. Few mistakes have been done. Companies came and left, tried things and left, and the whole industry is learning. We're also collaborating in some projects for doing OTV. And if you know how to go to geo once, you can also put this know-how in an OTV. But I see a few successful ones coming in the US and also in Europe and elsewhere. It looks to me that it's going to be the winner, that OTV to geo thing. If they can do it at the right price with the right pace, or right cadence, put it this way, the right price and the right cadence. There's some technological choices that needs to be, well thought, but it looks to me that this is going to be the way to do it. The last thing is to put a small satellite on the top of a big satellite. Programmatically, it's a bit difficult. So many people need to agree. I think few cases happen in the past, but doesn't look like this is the future. So the OTV market, LEO to GEO or GTO to GEO, in my opinion, a good niche, sizable niche that we're taking very seriously.
Yeah, great. And now you have companies like Impulse saying they're going to offer the OTV to Geo. Impulse was on this podcast a while ago, but there's an episode. So where are you guys right now? I think you mentioned you're doing ground testing, you're preparing for an in-orbit demonstration of your technology.
Yeah, so we've put the satellite in orbit once in GEO, then we participated to some LEO mission. All of that was half commercial and half, tech demonstration. We have another GEO mission going up this year, and then we will be doing our first rendezvous end of 2026 in GEO. That's the plan, and all that is, well planned, funded, and so we just need to deliver that. We're looking and trying to make bigger missions and with more customers post 2027, post 2028. We are around 60 people right now. Base is in Toulouse. Team is growing. We're bringing people from, bigger companies. Very happy to be in Toulouse for that. We're expanding to the US, doing a bit of R&D in many other European countries. We feel we're well integrated in the European ecosystem. We want to be the European champion for in-orbit servicing, and we want to be able to compete with many US competitors at the same level. There is enough market for all of us. This is how I see it now. We're happy, growing, and we look forward to our first rendezvous in GEO in 2026.
And so from what I'm hearing there, so if that 2026 mission goes well, basically the path forward is you're going to scale up the life extension missions, and then I guess over time you start adding on the other segments.
But after we make the first one successful, it will become hopefully a volume game. We need to do more of what was successful once. That's the path, and I'm optimistic about our path going forward.
I forgot to ask you on the tech side, are you actually building your own spacecraft, or are you buying like a bus of somebody else and then adding on to your sensors and payload?
We are making the design of the bus, but we're building in collaboration with people who built buses before. That's our approach. We own the design and the IP, but there are people who are much better than us in manufacturing, testing, moving satellites around, and things like that.
Yeah. Because geospacecraft are also not trivial, right? There's all sorts of considerations like the radiation management and all of that. Okay, where do you see, so apart from infinite orbits, where do you see the market, the in-space servicing market as such going in a 10-year time frame? I know that's a difficult question. We could probably talk for hours about that, but people have all sorts of visions. That maybe someday we'll have something even like, where it's just almost like buses in space and the payload gets swapped out robotically when it's obsolete. And I don't know. Do you have any sort of...
I see that. There are many aspects of the space industry that will become obsolete, or at least they will change. And that originated from a very simple idea that will disappear. And that simple idea is that space was not serviceable. And because space is not serviceable, then people tend to do things in a certain way. Refueling is a very good example, because space is not serviceable. Nobody was thinking of refueling, which means that you need to pack a lot of fuels, and then you need to do it in a certain way. You need to make a choice of the fuel. And, so many things came from that very simple idea that will become obsolete. So I think the fact that you render space serviceable will gradually change the nature, the cost of the assets that you have in space. So I totally see the day where you can refuel many assets. I see the day where you can actually change a solar panel. We did it for the International Space Station. Okay, it's heavy, expensive, government-funded mission and things like that. But if the rendezvous, the going to space, the going to GEO become accessible, then a defunct solar panel can one day be just replaced. The maturity and the lifetime of the different component of a satellite are also different. Maybe the platform of a satellite can live 20 years, but the payload can become obsolete in 5 years. So you can imagine one day that you go take a payload and just put another one. Take a KU, stupid example, but just for the sake of example, take a KU payload and put a KA payload. And really, maybe this will become possible one day. To me, it's like on the ground, you have antennas, for 3G that, need to be upgraded to 5G, and you're not going to change the whole antenna. And, so you just need to change what needs to be changed. Maybe one day this will be possible. Assets will be modular in space, and you can take one model, put another one. And again, the base for that is to be able to do RPO at a cost-effective manner, because not people who are going to do all these things. There needs to be autonomy, and autonomy comes from vision and from AI. This is why this is 80% of what we do.
Adel, our last two questions are always the same. First one is, if you weren't doing infinite orbits and in-space servicing in general, is there any other segments of the commercial space sector you are particularly fascinated by at the moment?
If I'm not doing an orbit servicing, what would I be doing in the space sector?
Commercial space sector, yeah.
If my pocket were like much deeper, I'll be building rockets. I'm a very simple engineer. I mean, luckily there is enough capital and people doing that. So, I mean, I see that the market will have brought that. But, building a rocket reusable that can launch from the equator or the pole or from next door, if I can launch a rocket from my garden and put something on it, I'll be doing that. Yeah, rockets. Yeah, I love rockets.
Okay, rockets. And last question is about science fiction. Do you like science fiction? And if so, what are your favorites?
No, not big science fiction. Sorry. Yeah,
I think you like the third in 140 episode or so. But I'm prepared for that to happen. It's fine. We had a couple of other guests who were, I'm basically working on making it happen in the real world.
Yeah. I think I like I like ambitions and things and dreams that are actually accessible within my lifetime. So I get motivated by that. Yeah, I like science fiction. No, not my thing.
It's totally fine. Listen, thank you so much for coming on today, and
thank you.
Best of luck with the upcoming test in orbit.
Thanks. Bye, Rafael.
Thanks. Bye. And that's it for another nominal episode of the Space Business Podcast. And once more, if you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast platform, such as Apple or Spotify. You can follow us on Twitter at podcast_space. We're also on LinkedIn under the Space Business Podcast. Lastly, if you have any feedback, including ideas for guests, and that may even include yourself if you have an exciting space story to tell, or interested in becoming a sponsor, or really for any other suggestions, you can drop us an email at spacebusinesspodcast@gmail.com. Thanks so much for listening, and see you for the next episode.